Another Mike Diesel production.
Knocking those lines, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those lines, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those lines, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my wit line. Knocking those lines, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those lines, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those lines, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my wit line. Knocking those lines.
Yo, shalom. We back. Source Gang, 7 Gang over everything. You know how we rocking, man. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share our video on the various social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and what have you. Let's get the information out there, man. We're working our ass off over here. We're working overtime to make sure you guys can get top-notch education and educational material here, and bringing out history, bringing out science, DNA, genetics, anthropology, archaeogenetics, archaeology, We try to give y'all the works, man. No plain Janes over here. No plain Janes over here, man. I say shalom to everybody. Hope you guys enjoyed your Sabbath. We here to work, man. We here to put in that work because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and the DNA is not being taught, and a lot of our people across the continent of Africa and various other places are pitted against each other. And I like us to all come back together as one family, as we should, because we all go back to that Clade EP2, U1B1A, U1B1B. I did a video on that and how we're related. But today we're going to talk about Johnathan Schorsch. No, before that, let me mention something, man. On Clubhouse, it was something funny. It was hilarious. We were in a group talking about the haplogroup J marker being originally from the Caucasus and migrating and absorbing and adopting the Semitic culture from those with a haplogroup E. And an Ashkenazi Jew joined the room and he began to speak. And I just, gave him the $1 million question. What is your Y DNA? And he said, EM35. I said, oh, well, you family, man. You U1B1B. I'm U1B1A, you family. And this guy had a conniption. No, we're not related. We're not related. I was like, that's how DNA works. If you share the same Y macro group or Y paternal clade, then you guys are our family. And this guy just had a conniption and he wanted to deny DNA. He was saying, we're not related. Stop calling me brother. And it really got awkward. I said, if we're not family, we're not related, then fishes don't have gills, since we're denying empirical scientific facts. Humans don't need to breathe oxygen. Organisms don't need to breathe oxygen, since we could just deny empirical reality. So it was getting real conspiratorial, conspiracy like. That's for you brothers that doubt and discount DNA when it comes to being relatives. You guys got to get over that, man. A lot of these, the Ashkenazi was upset that he had an African haplogroup, EM35. It went back to E1B1B. He said, I'm just shocked. I'm shocked. So I wanted to share that story with y'all. It was funny. I wish I was recording it. You know what I mean? Ezekiel Ben Israel, what did you email me, brother? What did you email me? Let me see. What did you email me? Jury, yeah, man. So, I mean, let's get to the topic, man. I ain't gonna hold y'all up on that too long. Having those discussions, I've been able to reach a lot of people on Clubhouse. It's actually been a great tool to reach people in other countries, other perspectives. Different, like social media, the good side of social media, being able to reach people across the globe is always an amazing thing. And, and share the experience and talk about DNA and, so we can get over these preconceived notions about each other and that we're different people or whatnot. It's just the beauty of DNA. But today's topic is dealing with the Jews can be counted among Black people. This is a quote from a book. I believe it's called the Sephardic Atlantic, and it's referring to Johnathan Schorsch's work. Okay, Johnathan Schorsch wrote a book, The Jews and Blacks in the Modern World, and he did a whole chapter dedicated to the invention of Jewish whiteness. That's what the chapter is labeled, and we're going to read that chapter today live. You know how we rocking, man. We go straight to the academia. We go straight to the sources here. I would like to believe our channel is very unique in that regard, especially dealing with the African American experience here and what we see in YouTube and the type of content that's being given out there by the conscious community. Oh, okay, yeah, I have to check it. He said he sent me a video with a letter from the Ashkenazi rabbi writing to West Africa saying they saw the banners of the 10 tribes in Africa. Yeah, I have to check that out, brother. All right, so what we're going to do is first we're going to read a quote from the Sephardic Atlantic. And then we're going to dig into the actual chapter to explicate what's being said here. All right, so let's go ahead and share that. Let's get straight to the source. All right, here we go. Sephardic Atlantic. As you can see, page 167 to 169. It says, as Johnathan Schorsch, so you can see that that's her point of reference. He helped write this book as well. Has conventionally argued early modern Jews were not automatically white. That's a direct quotation from the book. It says, but they were easily counted among black people. So this is what it says. They were easily counted among black people. Or it gives you the option. They were at least considered to be of a special white but Jewish status. 56. So we want this right here. We want this quote here. And why the sister put, but they were easily counted among black people. She's basing it off of what Johnathan Schorsch put in his book. What Johnathan Schorsch did was collect a bunch of historical writings and descriptions of black people, of black Jews from that era that were living in Amsterdam, that were living in Britain, that were making commentary about Jews in New York. And he put it in this chapter called The Invention of Jewish Whiteness to show and prove that these people were seen to be somatically means their body was black, or we consider black, dark, brown, or what have you. All right, so if you click on Google Play and you own the book, you can actually click the source and they give you the reference. It says Johnathan Schorsch, Jews and Blacks, page 179. And it says, for a detailed discussion together with Jewish patterns of replies, see, Ebid means the same book, right? That just means the same source. Pages 166 to 216. Now that includes chapter 8, which is part 2, but we're just going to be dealing with chapter 7, which is part 1 of the discussion. I'm going to read it in its entirety and get the context on why they're saying this right here. But they were easily counted among black people. And again, Johnathan Schorsch has convincingly argued early modern Jews were not automatically white. That's what the statement says. For anybody that's doubtful. And this is the cover of the book here, the Sephardic Atlantic Colonial Histories and Post-Colonial Perspectives, edited by Sina and Johnathan Schorsch. So from there, let's go straight to the book. I have the book here. Before we do this, how could I forget? Before we dive into the book, that's CYA. Copyright material. So, but we're protected under the Fair Use Act. The Fair Use Act says that we can show this material here. Section 107 of the Copyright Act provides the statutory framework for determining whether something is a fair use and identifies certain types of uses, such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. So we're going to be doing this for scholarship purposes, teaching purposes, research purposes, and I will be giving my commentary and critiques here and there. So we are well within our right to share this information here on the source tonight. All right, let's get it. Let me blow this up so you guys can see the words. So I had to scan this in because the digital copy is not available for purchase, unfortunately. I own the physical copy. But this is the page right here that was being referenced to in the book Sephardic Atlantic, page 179. Now, I'm going to backtrack and read the entire chapter for you guys, but this is what she was referring to. Page 179 under here where it says some moments of incipient autoethnography. Despite the discursive silence, the increasing reluctance and discomfort surrounding the admission of slaves into Judaism correlated directly with the blackening of the slave population and the rising importance for Jews of seeing themselves and having themselves seen as white. Contra Robert Cohen and other scholars, only modern Jews were not early modern Jews were not automatically white. This is what was being quoted in the Sephardic Atlantic. Each age perhaps needs to be worked out its own scheme of ethnic relations. So again, these early Jews, early modern Jews were not automatically seen as white or viewed as white. Like in today's world, when you tell somebody, yeah, I'm Jewish or I have Israelite lineage, they say, oh, no, you're not. You can't be because you're not white. That wasn't always the case. Like we read in Tudor Parfit's book, Hybrid Hate, the Jews were seen to be somatically black. And we might go over that tonight. We might go back and refresh you guys' memory if you wasn't here for that video. Says each age perhaps needs to work out its own scheme of ethnic relations, part of which often entails the production of a color hierarchy. Much evidence shows that both Jews and non-Jews during the early colonial era were ambivalent about the racial status of Jews. There are some medieval Jewish expressions to the effect that Jews were seen in Europe as black and ugly. So when we go to the Sephardic Atlantic, and I believe it's page 169. When we go to this book right here, and what was the statement we just read? There are some medieval Jewish expressions to the effort that Jews were seen in Europe as black and ugly. This is why this statement here says early modern Jews were not automatically white, a direct quotation from his book, but they were easily counted among black people. This is why. But if you don't own the book and all you did was see me quote this, you wouldn't understand it because you have to read Johnathan Schorsch's chapter regarding this quote here. And this is why she says, as Johnathan Schorsch has convincingly argued. Why? Because he has empirical data, he has quotations, he has different pieces of evidence to prove the statement after this. Early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. Back to the source. There are some medieval Jewish expressions to the effect that Jews were seen in Europe as black and ugly, keeping in mind that blackness or whiteness is always a relative matter. Indeed, the metaphysical reading one text gave to this color scheme reflects the polemical usage such as physical theories acquired, perhaps always had. The 13th century text of polemics by Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Nathan Official, in Sefer Netzahon Yashan, a guide for Jews disputing Christians, probably written in early 14th century German lands, contain nearly identical answers to charges of Jewish ugliness and blackness. All right. It says the heretics, i.e. the Christians, ask and say, why are majority of Gentiles, i.e. Christians, white and attractive, while the majority of Jews are black and ugly? Again, this is why on the Sephardic Atlantic it says early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. And I know the cynics, the opposition, they don't want to acknowledge this because they do not read, they do not study. We do. All right, so now that we got that cleared up, let's go to the beginning of the chapter. We're going to read this entire chapter. And when I tell you there's some jewels in here, I've shared things in here already, if you guys have been following the channel, but we're going to read the chapter from the beginning to the end. All right. So y'all got to strap in like New Jersey twerk, man. Let's go. Let's get to the beginning because there's some key points in here. And this is the book right here, Jews and Blacks in the Early Modern World by Johnathan Schorsch. And we're doing this for scholarship and research purposes and teaching purposes. So we are well within our right to share this information. Chapter 7, Inventing Jewish Whiteness, the 17th century Western Sephardic Diaspora, Part 1. In this chapter and the next, I explore several aspects of the self-fashioning of early modern Jews into whites in and under European colonialism. The central location in the 17th century Amsterdam, although I followed the pertinent flow of people and discourse into and out of this recent haven for ex-conversos and Sephardic Jews. Just chapter first section traces the decline of the circumcision of slaves in the 17th century, a decline reflective of an increasing discomfort with the religious absorption of slaves, now mostly black, on the part of the Western Sephardic Jews, themselves uneasy about their own status vis-a-vis whiteness. This twin discomfort serves as the themes of the next section, which treats Jewish and non-Jewish views of Jewish somatic darkness. Again, what does the word somatic mean? Because people say, no, this is metaphorical. When they say Jews are black, it's metaphor. It means dirty. It's metaphorical. No, it means somatic. So let me before we go on, Google that. Somatic. Let me make sure that we live still. All right, you guys can see that. Somatic, right? Let's get this definition. All right. The definition of the word somatic is relating to the body, especially as distinct from the mind. So whenever you see something say someone's black somatically, that means their body is physically black. There is no metaphoric understanding to that. They are somatically black. They are physically black, literally black. So if anybody's trying to run and say, well, when the Jews are called black, it's a metaphor. Stop it. Let me read it again. It says, again, this is why reading is fundamental, man. It says that these twin discomforts serves as the themes of the next section, which treats Jewish and non-Jewish views of Jewish somatic darkness. The first section of the next chapters cover the communal legislation constructing and reflecting the Jewish response, as it were, while the second segment investigates one specific instantiation of Jewish whiteness as a result of a late 17th century visit of some Amsterdam Sephardim to their newly rediscovered cousins in Cochin, India. First, however, a few words to help set the stage. The idea of nation at the end of the Middle Ages constituted an essentially ethno-linguistic one. As previously mentioned, from the era of contact with sub-Saharan Africans, Europeans appeared familiar with the different nations or countries from which they originated. Although no contemporary source delineated the relationship between the categorical level of these nations and the categorical level of blacks, Negroes, one sees by the 17th century their simultaneous use. Although knowledge of ethnic peculiarities in Africa continued in Europe and in the Americas among planters, merchants, travelers, missionaries, and politicians, the generic term Negro or black and the cluster of concepts around it came to predominate. The importance of the term and concept of whiteness, not surprisingly, also rose in this period. So again, he's just giving the explanation of these identities and how they formed and they shaped in early colonial America. And to this day, we still use this, oh, he's black, he's white. And they use them as a binary oppositional model. Like, if someone's black, they can't have white ancestry, and then vice versa, which is bullshit. If you understand DNA, you can have someone sharing the same paternal clades, same maternal clades, and be of different colors, different phenotype, can look East Asian, can look Sub-Saharan African, so on and so forth, and vice versa. Like you have the Andamanese Islanders, which are related to the Ainu in Japan, and a lot of them look East Asian, but the people in the Andaman Islands, they look Sub-Saharan African, but they both share the same paternal clade. They are directly related, DM174. Same exact haplotype. But over here in the Americas during the colonial time, you can see they create that binary oppositional model, which is based off imprecise criterion. Just based off someone's skin color and how they look, and they stamp your pedigree and your ancestry based on that. All right, so let's keep reading. It says the importance of the term and the concept of whiteness, not surprisingly, also rose in this period. The specific usefulness of whiteness for the Jews inherited in the fact that Jews could include themselves in the dominant culture as whites in a way they could not as non-Christians. One late 20th century Jew growing up in Mississippi aptly expressed this quandary in his recollections. I don't want to be a Christian, but at the same time, I didn't want to be different. Whiteness provided entry at the same time. I didn't, entry into the dominant class of to Jews who believed they belong there by dint of the quality and antiquity of their civilization. Such was their hope in any case. Throughout this discussion, I purposely avoid the use of the term race. Scholarship focus on this term and concept has tended to become distracted by the goal of producing a retrojected linear history. Ivan Hannaford accounts constitutes only the most recent example of such an approach. Scholarship covering this textual or intellectual history has tended to date the origin of racism to the development in the 18th century European thought, while scholarship focused on social history prefers a somewhat earlier unfolding in the European colonies. Hannaford's history of the ideas of race in this respect offers little news. According to Hannaford, the detached and scholarly European use of the terms race, species, and ethnic groups begins to increase in the late 17th century. Francois Bernier, 1625 and 1688, Hobbes, 1588 to 1679, and John Locke, 1632 to 1704. But the real implementation of ordering humankind in terms of anatomy, climate, and pigmentation in a new and more rational science came with Johnathan Friedrich Blumenbach. And that's why I keep telling you guys that are trying to pigeonhole people on skin color and modern races like the black races, the African race, Europeans, the white race, Asian race is the yellow race, Melanesian is the brown, and the Native Indians are the red. That is an old, antiquated system and schema that's not based off biology or pedigree or genealogy at all. It's based off Johann Friedrich Blumenbach's classification of the human populations. It says, in late 18th century reinvention of the notion of the national character in physical anthropology. Margaret T. Hodgson thought that the break with a continuous great chain of being and one indivisible humankind came in the last quarter of the 17th century and the first third of the 18th century with Sir William Petty's abortive essay entitled The Cow of Creatures, 1676-77. Sir William Tyson's Orange Otang, Sive Homo Civilistris, or The Anatomy of the Pygmy, 1708, and Colonial's System of Nature, 1735. Michael Banton found that the word race entered English in the 16th century where it at first referred to lineage. And that's how I use the word race. If we're going to use it at all, I would use it in its initial person usage, which was to determine lineage, which would mean it would supersede and pretty much encompass black, white, different phenotypes, because again, you can have the same lineage and people in your lineage not look exactly the same. Let's keep reading. It says, but despite the appearance of John Ray, 1627-1705, Banton's account of race as classification by type does not really begin until Linnaeus, 1707-1778, and Kant, 1724-1804, and the philosophers of their generation. David D.O. Goldberg wrote that the racialized discourse began to be articulated in the 16th century, but began his narrative with Hume, 1711-1776, Kant and Mill, 1806-1873. Historians with a more social bent usually propose a somewhat earlier origin, as I discussed earlier, and we'll treat more extensively in the next chapter. A segregational sistema de castas began to be implemented in various Spanish colonies by the mid-17th century, and with time solidified in virulence and scope. Social structuration based increasingly solely on skin color spread quickly to the Dutch, English, French, and other colonies. Alden T. Vaughan Just wanted to stroll down very slowly. It says, saw the concepts of race applied with different meanings into the different groups in the 17th century, increasingly in social ways, while belief in such groupings became more widespread and more individuals as time passed. Close quote. Misconceptions of race, Vaughan acknowledged, open quote, profoundly shaped early Euro-American relations with Africans from the outset, and Native Americans from the 17th century onward. In Gary Puckrane's view, race became important in Barbados by the close of the 17th century when blacks increasingly sought baptism, and the Church of England ruled that conversion did not emancipate slaves, so that paganism no longer distinguished a slave from a free man. Peter Fryer likewise located the origin of racism in the oral tradition in Barbados in the 17th century, which crystallized in print in Britain in the 18th. According to Robin Blackburn, this English variant of racial slavery, harsher than the Iberian form, was firmly established already in the 1660s. The Renaissance Baroque connection between the rise of legal individuality and the legal notion of race buttressed a view for an earlier rather than later formation of Euro-colonial racism. Naturally, the timing of the waxing and waning of anti-black prejudice varied from the colonial situation to another. Indeed, a comparative look at the development of black slavery and discourse about blacks in the Iberian, Dutch, and English colonial empires reveals a nearly identical trajectory of initial acceptance, perhaps ambivalent discursive degradation, but lack of social segregation, and subsequent hardening into racial, social, and discursive structuration. This pattern repeated itself within each empire, which each locale by no means appeared in a necessary linear fashion. Such a framework applies the systadial same stage rather than synchronic historical interpretation called for by Sidney W. Mintz. Here again, we should note the manner in which the later colonial players learned from their predecessors. This chapter and the next treat the Jewish locale in its intercolonial trajectory. They treat precisely the transition between discursive and social constructions of blackness and whiteness. My analysis of the uses of Jewish whiteness in these chapters does not dramatically challenge the consensual historical schema of race, though it agrees with the nudging it slightly earlier. However, rather than attempt to construct an abstract and totalizing discursive schema of race inductively from a small set of examples, I try to pay attention to specific discriminations in their particular context, social as well as discursive, to see how they are put to use. Who, what is excluded, by whom, how, why in this regard. I find attractive Robert R. Douglas Cope's understanding that the 17th century development of the colonial sistema de clases marks the gradual imposition of an elite racial ideology in the interstices of a system of governance that was playing off Creole against peninsular and striking compromises between royal authority and colonial claims. The resultant racial code relied heavily on an improvisation and patchwork. Not only the code, but the definition behind it were far from stable. While into the 16th century, Portuguese in Brazil often referred to American natives as Negroes or Negros da Terra, Jews were sometimes seen to be black. And this goes back to what we read earlier, the somatic darkness of the Jews. Not metaphorical, somatic. These people were actually seen to be black. This is in his book. That's why reading is fundamental. It says the hammering out of the present meaning of the term Negro or black or mulatto in the system of the government subjects assigned to each category occurred over the course of 2 or 3 centuries. In fact, have never ended. The events covered in this chapter trace, from our perspective of Jewish history, a century or so in the construction of this discourse of governability in the mongrel new world created by colonialism. The events of this chapter occurred in Europe as well, as befits a story for the most part made there. Even if it took place mostly elsewhere in striking ways, residents in Amsterdam created for the Sephardim a social conceptual constellation similar to that created by white Christians in the overseas European colonies. In the dwindling circumcision of slaves in the West, the desire to convert slaves and servants to Judaism faced a certain amount of suppression from Sephardic lay leaders in the Atlantic world. By the 17th and 18th century, the circumcision of male slaves and the conversion of all slaves to Judaism seemed to have become undesirable and unpracticed in Jewish communities in the Netherlands, England, and their American colonies. So when someone says, oh, well, anybody that claimed to be Jew, they were all converts to slavery, tell them to give you the documents and the proof of conversion, because you really don't see that. It's really rare. But let's keep going. It says communal practices, including religious ones, experience natural up and down swings, and circumcision poses no exception. According to Israel Abrahams, the tendency to enforce circumcision of slaves grows with the Middle Ages, so that the 16th century found Jews more resolute in this matter than the 10th century found them. The decline after the 16th century in part stemmed from the general political and religious pressures against conversion to Judaism, especially in the English orbit. It also derived from the general trends of Jewish acculturations and falling away from the halakhic living, especially in the Americas. But as I will try to show, this transformation also reflected a more intimate nexus with the increasing identity of servitude and blackness, an increasing propensity to follow halakhic opinion, holding that the laws of slavery no longer attain or disregard halakhic thinking completely when it came to slaves. And number two, the growing use of value of racial notions in the vocabulary of Jewish leaders and thinkers. An extended footnote by Cecil Ross will serve as a good beginning point discussing the famous and prodigiously illustrated 1723 book by Bernard Picard on the rights and customs of the world's peoples, including the Jews. Roth highlighted the importance of one particular etching depicting the Passover meal of an Amsterdam Sephardic family. The plates are all, of course, the considerable historic as well as artistic importance, as illustrated most faithfully and vividly Jewish home life in the 18th century. Thus, in the representation of Seder, a Negro is shown sitting down at the table, which the family, a Negro is shown sitting down at the table with the family, an obvious indication that the Negro slaves and Amsterdam Jews were admitted to the faith. The order of the service for the circumcision of slaves is, as a matter of fact, printed in some contemporary prayer books, and there is a certain amount of tumulary evidence pointing to the same direction. Considering the very close intercourse between communities of Amsterdam and London, it is more than likely that the same practice attained here as well. Beyond the vagueness of the phrase admitted to the faith, Roth's surmise is both right and wrong. The 17th century actually constituted a limited period during which these practices began to be ignored. It seems that at first, many of the black slaves belonging to Jews in Amsterdam indeed underwent the rituals necessary to work in Jewish homes. This can be inferred from the cemetery records treated in chapter 3 and mentioned here by Roth, as well as other sources. For instance, the 1639 Hakamak Ordinance or the merged Sephardic congregation stated the Christian domestic serving girls who carried home kosher meat from the market had to be escorted by a Jew, yet failed to mention anything about slaves whom we know existed in this community, even if in small numbers. Probably this silence was due to the fact that most slaves had been converted. But as I will show, many of the most prominent Western Sephardic communities either banned the circumcision of bought slaves, first in the Dutch Brazil, 1649, and then Amsterdam, 1650, or ignored it in practice soon thereafter. In short, the black servant sitting at this early 18th century cedar table does not seem to be an obvious indication of anything. So again, this is why, again, reading is fundamental. So just because you see a black person at a table doesn't mean he's a convert, which is what Cecil Roth was trying to say. There's no real evidence, direct evidence to that. That's all inferred. Let's keep reading. It says, sitting with his back to the viewer, this servant slave prepares the vessel used for the ritual washing of the heads, though not standing that is in a position different from the family in one obvious service, as is often the case in such iconography. This black servant is still distinguished by posture. He is the only figure whose face is not visible to the viewer, and he engages in an act of service. Is he washing his own hands or merely aiding the family in washing of theirs? Even the sitting down with the family may tell us more about the Dutch practice than Jewish ones, since we know that among the former, both children and servants usually dine at the same table with their parents and masters. A Sephardic Jew in England who tried circa 1701 to distance himself from his converted daughter argued that she had been a servant and never sat with him at the table. Whether this later case reflected Sephardic or English custom, or that the particular family remains unclear. Without wanting to belabor the point, much ambiguity remains about whether this illustration proves that the Negro slaves and Amsterdam Jews were admitted to the faith. While some prayer books may have contained the order of the ritual service of circumcising slaves, as Roth notes, many did not. Many of the 17th and 18th century books of blessings made no mention of blessing to be said to purchasing a slave. Further, most legal compendia originating in Amsterdam, often written specifically for conversos returning to Judaism, failed to mention the circumcision of slaves. See later in this section. Additional evidence from Amsterdam, London, and the Dutch and English colonies regarding means of ritual absorption into Jewish community also fails to indicate the consistent circumcision of male slaves or the proper ritual immersions or either female or male slaves, much less their conversion. I am not arguing that some Jews in these places did not continue to circumcise and or immerse their slaves. Chapter 3 showed that few blacks and mulatto slaves had been converted in the 17th and 18th century Amsterdam, and from the language of certain communal ordinances treated in Chapter 8, that some had been circumcised. But that more Jews began not doing so, unlike in Eastern Mediterranean regions, and that communal leaders themselves discouraged the conversion of non-white slaves. The very instability of the pertinent 17th century discourse and behavior reflects that transformation. If the circumcision of slaves predominated as a halakhic and social norm, why then did it increasingly fail to appear in the 17th century halakhic sources from Amsterdam, as well as the 18th century sources from there and elsewhere? Transitional answers were appearing from across the Mediterranean region already in the medieval era. The minority view from the Talmud and later poskim left the window open for the holding of unconverted, uncircumcised pagan slaves. Simha Asaf stated that R. Mordechai B. Hillel, died in 1310, Ashkenaz, was the rabbi who renewed the use of this minority view. However, the transition of permission to keep an uncircumcised slave indefinitely was falling into place by the 11th century, as cited by Rabbi Yaakov B. Asher, 1270 to 1340, Spain. Rabbi Yishak Al-Falsi, 1013 to 1103, present-day Algeria, Fez, held that a purchased adult slave does not fall under the laws pertaining to slaves until he converts, circumcises, and immerses for the sake of enslavement on his own will. Rambam, when discussing the necessity of circumcising a slave, added an unprecedented statement. And if the Jew about to purchase the slave agreed from the start, while the slave was still with his non-Jewish master, not to circumcise him, it is permitted to maintain his uncircumcised. The slave must only take on the 7 Noahide commandments, and he will be like a resident alien. But we don't receive resident aliens except in times when the Jubilee years is in effect. Elsewhere, Rambam wrote that a slave brought from a non-Jew who refused from the outset to be circumcised could be retained in his non-Jewish status without time constraint. Rabbi Abraham B. David, known as Rabbad, circa 1125 to 1198, a significant opponent of Rambam on many issues, disputed Rambam's first formulation that resident aliens were no longer accepted. I cite from a paraphrase: a Jew may maintain a slave who stipulated that he will not circumcise or immerse as long as he wants in all eras, and the reason is that which they said, that the concept of resident alien is not operative at this time, was not with the intention of stating that the concept of receiving resident alien is completely inoperative, but rather that it is unclear that the concept of the resident alien or the slave under discussion is not obliged by those laws stated in the Gemara. Rabad could not accept that an entire class of converts stood inabsorbable. It must be, he reasoned, that such conversions or movements towards conversion remain licit. Only that the various Talmudic laws need no longer to be followed. He combined some of the just quoted opinions to construct a situation in which a non-Jewish slave could refuse to be circumcised or immersed, but does take on the Noahide commandments and can remain in a Jewish household indefinitely. Applied to the laws of slaves, Rabbi's understanding made them akin to the laws of agriculture, which only took effect if one lived in the land of Israel. Jews continued to farm outside of the land of Israel spatially and temporarily. They just did not need to follow the pertinent rabbinic laws. Finally, Rabbi Mordechai Hillel held in his commentary to the Talmudic tractate of Yevamot that should the government under which a community of Jews lived not allow the circumcision of slaves, this constituted the equivalent of a slave's refusal to be circumcised or immersed. And even though it's not usually stipulated at the hour of purchase, if there is simply no circumcising the slave because of the government, one does not have the greater stipulation than this. And one is permitted to retain uncircumcised slaves forever. From the immensely complex and contradictory tradition that had accumulated down to this time, Rabbi David ibn Zimra, or Ratbaz, 1479 to 1573, Egypt, concluded that there are three kinds of slaves besides a Hebrew slave, and they are these. One who is circumcised and immersed for the sake of enslavement. He is responsible for all of the mitzvah as the women. Second, one who did not circumcise or immerse, but took upon himself the 7 mitzvah of the sons of Noah, for he is like a resident alien. C, one who did not circumcise or immerse and worships as an idolater within the land of Israel. It is forbidden to retain him even one day, but outside of Israel, it is permitted to retain him. Jews in the diaspora could then possess the third kind of slave indefinitely, at least according to the increasingly wide view of this minority opinion. This view, as well, we see, as we will see, came to predominate. Despite its never being referred to explicitly in Western communities until the middle of the 18th century, the behavior of these communities toward their slaves make it likely that, at least de facto, they operated according to the view put forth here by Radbaz. So again, they wouldn't have been doing any mass conversion of slaves, is what he's pointing out here in this section, because they could still have slaves without converting them. Let me keep reading. It says another transitional answer to the questions of the decline of circumcised slaves can be found in the Italian R. Leon de Modena's Historia del Rite Brasi, first published in 1637, but composed some 20 years earlier. Here the author explains to his readers only part of the story. There were in ancient times a great many particulars to be observed relating to slaves which were in the possession of Jews, whether the slave himself were a Canaanite, as we read in Exodus 22nd chapter. Nowadays, if they buy any in the Levant or Barbary, they keep them and make use of them and sell them again according to the custom of the place where they live. And if the slaves be willing to turn Jews, they circumcise them and bathe them and so set them at liberty. Though no doubt accurately reflecting practice in Western Europe, Modena's explication also purposely served as an apologetic function. It took the position that slaves were to be assimilated only with their consent in order to countercharge the strikes of Jews routinely Judaizing their slaves and servants. It also conflated the stages involved in the ritual absorption of slaves, possibly for the same reasons. Circumcision in the first ritual immersion did not set slaves free, but merely enabled their existence in a Jewish home and their maintenance of certain base commandments. Only the second ritual immersion, conducted in the tandem with their manumissions, enabled their existence within the Jewish community by making them full Jews and legitimate marriage partners. Modena obviously presented the most lenient opinions, such that of Rabbis, that slaves could remain non-Jewish and were only converted if they chose after their liberation. Finally, Modena here made Jewish slaveholding a thing unconnected with modern European Jews by limiting its adherence to Jewish communities of the past and far away. All right, excuse me, guys. Let me get this back up here. to get the context of this book. Okay, it says an even more distant transformation in the discourse around circumstances can be read in other texts, nearly all of which derive from Amsterdam, but which reflected in the general approach of Western Sephardim to this topic. The starkest such indication of change is the simple and brief 1689. Let me blow this up real quick. There we go. That's much better. It says the starkest such indication of change is a simple and brief 1689 translation of the Shulchan Aruch into Spanish by R. David Pardo. Pardo completely neglected to mention that male slaves were to be circumcised, unlike his source text, whose first edition section on the laws pertaining to slaves opened with the heading, "One who takes a slave to whom it is forbidden to maintain the slave uncircumcised." Although Pardo's translation went to the trouble of repeating the minor point that slaves can perform circumcision under the close supervision of their owner. 10 years earlier, Isaac Cardoso, in a chapter devoted to circumcision, likewise ignored the practice of circumcising slaves while mentioning that a slave may perform a circumcision. Other authors also ignored without explanation that seemingly critical and clear biblical commandments to circumcise male slaves, including many prominent rabbis. A 1683 Hebrew compendium of the commandments by Rabbi Shlomo de Oliveira died 1658. A 1692 digest of commandments in Spanish. The list of the commandments at the back of the 1695 Spanish translation of the 5 books of Moses, a 1713 compendium of the commandments, a similar Hebrew compendium from 1753, a 1763 verse rendition of the commandments according to Rambam, and a 1768 circumcision booklet. Nearly all the authors of the works lived in Western Europe or in Dutch or English colonial orbit. Again, I am not seeking to prove that circumcision of slaves disappeared. Manasseh ben Israel's compendium of Jewish laws for conversos returning to Judaism from 1647, rather early in the trajectory described in this chapter and the next, includes a chapter that on the halakha pertaining to owning slaves, which devotes nearly half of its length to requirements for immersion in circumcision. But that so many other rabbis could overlook it indicates that something other than general pressures against halakha were operative. After all, these Western Sephardic communities continue to be highly ritually observant in many ways throughout the 17th century. If not later, these silences cannot all be mere oversights. Only one of these rabbis mentioned in passing and inferentially that the laws pertaining to slavery held only until the destruction of the temple, and this was in the mid-18th century. Not one author referred to the liberalization of rabbis or others. It would seem that many leading Sephardic rabbis entered in unpublicized campaign to suppress the practice of circumcising slaves. This example, all from the second half of the 17th century or later, accompanied changes in the general cultural attitude amongst Sephardim, as manifested in Amsterdam Sephardic Muhammad's 1650 prohibitions of the circumcision of blacks and mulattoes. The Amsterdam ban, in turn, may very well have stemmed from the ordinance passed only the previous year by Muhammad in Recife, Brazil, declaring that slaves could only be circumcised after the liberation. We will return again to the forces motivating this silence on the circumcision of slaves. All right, let's move on to the next part. So basically what we just read was dealing with the paucity, meaning the lack of evidence that these people were actually practicing this in mass, like a bunch of slaves being circumcised and being immersed in Jewish culture. That was not the case. And this is why you have to actually read this damn book and not just make commentary about the book. Let's continue to read. Slave conversion and circumcision according to contemporary legal and demographic records. Legalization in Western Sephardic communities accompanied a discursive move away from the ritual absorption of slaves. The awareness about accepting converts from among slaves to some degree correlated with pressures against the conversion of Christian to Judaism and with rising Portuguese chauvinism. The Amsterdam Civic Statutes regarding Jews drawn up in 1616 stuck to the bare minimum of medieval legislation concerning Jews, including the usual warning not to attempt to seduce any Christian person away from our Christian religion or to circumcise one. In 1627, Amsterdam Sephardic community members were asked not to immerse blacks or mulattoes or others without the permission of the Parnassium. With the unification of the three Amsterdam congregations in 1639, various new ordinances were published forbidding proselytizing in the circumcision of non-Jews without the community's permission, and then only among those of Sephardic descent. These regulations thought to avoid endangering the freedom we enjoy. Also, I want to make note, it says only among those of Sephardic descent. So only people that can convert to the religion, because that's what you're dealing with, converting to the religion of Judaism, is those that were actually sons or daughters of Sephardic men. See how that works? They had to literally descend from Sephardim to convert into the religion during this time, right? These regulations sought to avoid endangering the freedom we enjoy, as the leadership of the Sephardic community put it, and make violations punishable by excommunication. Finally, in 1650, the Parnassium banned outright the circumcision of or immersion of blacks and mulattoes who didn't fit a narrow and halakhically incorrect definition of a yelit bayit, a slave born in the house of the master. It was not until 1750 that a rabbi in Amsterdam or anywhere in Western Europe or its colonies stated outright that Jewish laws pertaining to non-Jewish slaves were no longer valid. See Chapter 9. And to the best of my knowledge, no civic prohibition on the holding of non-Christian slaves and their conversions to Judaism was ever promulgated in the Netherlands, England, or any of their colonies. Something else caused the shift away from the absorption of slaves into the community. Let us review the extant legislation from the communities under our lens. The 1649 Haskamot to Recife, Brazil, explicitly addressed the issues of circumcising slaves. No doubt, in Amsterdam, these Haskamot proceeded from a specific local cause. Johnathan Israel mentioned without citing the source that in early Dutch Brazil, a few of the Jews were mulatto half-castes. And what did that mean? They were, if they're half-castes, the Jews, I mean, these Jewish Sephardic men were sleeping with their slave women and creating children. That's why earlier we just read, in order for them to convert into Judaism, the religion Judaism, they would have to at least be of Sephardic descent. Let's keep reading. It says, instead of banning conversion of slaves, the Muhammad attempted to control them. No person shall accept with the permission of the gentleman of the Muhammad circumcise a stranger or admit a strange woman to the Hulia, under penalty of being separated from the nation and fined 50 florins. And if the person be a slave, he shall not be circumcised without first having been freed by his master, so that the master shall not be able to sell him from the moment the slave will have been bound himself to Judaism. The last provision constituted a nimble response to the specific exigencies of the Brazilian slave economy, in which some Jewish merchants routinely possessed enormous numbers of slaves temporarily before selling them off. The new provision did not so much ensure the potential slave convert that her conversion would guarantee manumission, but made certain that Jewish slaves would not be sold to non-Jews. The provision effectively penalized any master who circumcised his slaves before manumission, whether protective of the slave's interests or exclusive for the sake of the Jewish community. The provision went directly contrary to the Shulchan Aruch and the positions of other poskim. In any event, it placed a hardship on observant masters in a slave economy such as Brazil. It is possible that the postponement of conversion until after manumission derived from the trend among Iberian ecclesiastical authorities to conduct baptism only when slaves showed a passable level of religious devotion and knowledge. In the London community, the Muhammad acted from the outset to control the conversion of any foreigner. The language of the stipulation from the first meeting of the communal board in 1663 read as follows: no person who is not of our nation, Portuguese and Spaniards, may be circumcised, and no mohel, ritual circumciser, shall be allowed to circumcise them under pain of harem, excommunication. And those who should contravene this escama ordinance, as well as any person who may know it, shall be bound to declare it to the Muhammad. Under the same penalty, and under the said penalty is included anyone who may bathe a foreign woman, because it is not meet that they be admitted into our congregation. So this is 1663. They were really banning this thing, man. Let's keep reading. While not explicitly aimed at slaves or servants, such ordinance clearly impinged on the halakhic necessity of circumcising male slaves and ritually immersing females. It is not meet to accept converts. Certainly, the command board worried about the potential dangers of converting Christians in general. But as will be seen, such language typified communal legislation regarding servants. Within a decade, the Muhammad meeting in 1671 prohibited both the acceptance of proselytes and the employment, even temporarily, of maids who have been converted to Judaism. It is difficult to tell whether in practice slaves of Western Sephardim were in fact circumcised or immersed for either slavery or conversion. Circumcision records, one potential source pose certain difficulties. They must be carefully cross-checked with other sources. The mention of a slave or servant appears to be highly exceptional. Rare immersions and conversions in Amsterdam are mentioned in the community records, such as that of the Muslim maidservant or Sarah, a serving woman in the house of Yosef Sarfati, who converted in 1688. It is not even clear whether other aberrations, such as illegitimate children, were routinely included, though they sometimes seem to be. Their inclusion or exclusion probably depended on the moral and stylistic character of the recording mohel. For instance, the Circumcision Book of Amsterdam, mohel Moshe Abrabanal, spanning the years 1693 to 1725, mentioned for the year 1704 Joseph, the natural son of Samuel Abrabranca, 19, Nisan 23, April. This marked the sole such entry for a period of over 30 years. Such unusual annotations were deemed necessary to explain socially disparaged births, that is, out of wedlock and or by servant women. Considerably more difficult is proving births of circumcision left out of the records or hidden in neutral terminology. None of the early circumcision registers for Amsterdam mentioned the circumcision of slaves, servants, blacks, or mulattoes. As stated in chapter 3, the number of servants of slaves buried in the Jewish cemetery of Amsterdam, not more than 15 for the years 1614 and 30 and 1680 and 1716, almost exclusively women, indicates that most such domestic staff remain unconverted and would not have received burial within the Jewish cemetery. In this light, the zeal noted in the Amsterdam merchant Diogo Dias Querido for attempting to convert even his slaves to the Jewish faith becomes clear. Such cases constituted a small minority. So again, these were rare events that's going on. So people blabbing their mouth about Jewish conversion, and all these people were converts. That was a very rare thing, and we just read it. So anybody watching this should know if you're taking notes and you're being tentative. Let's keep reading. For England, we have recourse to very limited data. The circumcision register of Isaac and Abraham de Paiba, covering 1715 to 1775, from the manuscript record preserved in the archives of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews congregation of London, made no mention of whether any of these names were slaves, servants, blacks, or mulattoes. The list of circumcision from 1679 to 1699, compiled from the Congregational Treasurer's accounts books, recorded but a single entry for a servant of Dr. Joseph Pereira, circumcised during the winter of 1696-97. thus provides us one documented case of a servant circumcision over a 20-year time span, a remarkably low figure, keeping in mind that there were 22 male servants of Jews listed on the city's 1695 census alone. It remains unclear, however, whether no servants, slaves, or blacks were circumcised, or whether the register's composers had such identities and neutral terminology. For instance, a person bearing the name Ger equal convert or so, and so on, son of Abraham or daughter of Sarah, might represent a converted slave, but without concrete evidence, this would be pure speculation. Again, that's why you gotta read. This is why I read. a lot of the community, a lot of the African conscious community in America is going off pure speculation when they blab their mouth and run their mouth about Jewish conversion. Let me keep going. This picture in the Dutch English colonies remains murky, but it seems highly unlikely, especially after the 17th century, that Sephardim and the colonies routinely circumcised or converted their slaves. As can be seen from the previous chapters, even Jews in traditional and observant communities in the Mediterranean region often fail to observe halakha pertaining to circumcision or immersion of slaves. What differed in the movement westward is that the communal leaders and rabbis stopped insisting in the necessity of these same halakha. If not actively discouraging their practice, if circumcision of slaves occurred at all, it was only in rare cases of the slaves' conversion to Judaism, not a purchase as traditionally required by most halakhis, except in certain extenuating circumstances as described. The halakha in practice among Sephardim in Western Europe and colonists seem to have made this merely a circumcision performed upon voluntary conversion. This trajectory stood both in accord and in contrast to the converso belief described by Miriam Badiam about the religio-ethnic defining power of circumcision when it came to the masters themselves. Thus, Amsterdam R. Saul Levi Motorea compares circumcision to a possession of a certificate of the nobility. In the case of ex-conversos in the Amsterdam, rabbis frequently cooperated in making circumcision a precondition for the full acceptance in Portuguese communities. It is possible that very sacramental and salvational status accorded to circumcision in some converso circles precluded it being shared with others deemed unworthy, such as black and mulatto slaves. To understand the transformation of practice among the halakha, then we turn to issues never brought up in the literature treating the questions of whether or not circumcising one's slaves, the increasing correlation of servitude and skin color. Indeed, a certain irony attends the trend of the suppression of circumcision with westward movement. While in Europe, external pressures operated against the conversion of circumcision of Christians who might be servants in Jewish households across the Atlantic. Far less concern existed both the conversion of circumcision of black slaves to Judaism, since the Christianization of these slaves itself remained an ambivalent goal. Instead, the pressure stemmed from internal transformation in the Sephardic self-identity. All right, I know that was a lot, but we getting there. We getting there, man. Hit that like button. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Show us some love. So we learned that conversion of slaves, the evidence for it is there's very there's a paucity of evidence for it. It was very rare during this time, and it wasn't like they were just handing out conversion to Judaism to every servant and slave that they have. This is the misconception of the unlearned black conscious community. And we can clearly see those that actually study this history, Jewish Sephardic history, that these people were not doing mass conversions of slaves. That's just no evidence of that. All right, let's keep going. Let's get to the meat and potatoes of this. The title of this video is Jews Can Be Counted Among Black People. And this is the portion of the book that explains this in the chapter, The Invention of Jewish Whiteness, in Johnathan Schorsch's book. So just to remind everybody, the Sephardic Atlantic, page number 167 by Irina and Johnathan Schorsch says, as Johnathan Schorsch has conventionally argued, early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. That's the point that is being expounded upon in this chapter, because if we click the connotation, it says Schorsch, Jews and Blacks. This is the book we're reading, page 179. For a detailed discussion together with the Jewish patterns of replies, see Ibid, meaning the same source, 166 to 116. So we're reading this to get an understanding of why it says Jews were easily counted among black people. And we already know, we read earlier in his book, that these Jews were somatically dark, meaning their bodies were physically dark. So anybody's trying to make the excuse of a metaphysical or metaphorical blackness, that's not the case. Let's get it. So, some moments of incipient autoethnography. Despite the discursive silence, the increasing reluctance and discomfort surrounding the admission of slaves into Judaism correlated directly with the blackening of the slave population and the rising importance for Jews of seeing themselves and having themselves seen as white. Contra Robert Cohen and other scholars, early modern Jews were not automatically white. Each age perhaps need to work out its own scheme of ethnic relations, part of which often entails the production of a color hierarchy. Much evidence shows that both Jews and non-Jews during the early colonial era were ambivalent about the racial status of Jews. There are some medieval Jewish expressions to the effects that Jews were seen in Europe as black and ugly. Keeping in mind that blackness or whiteness is always relative matter. Indeed, the metaphysical reading one text gave to this color scheme reflects the polemical usages such as physical theories acquired, perhaps always had. The 13th century text of the polemics by Rabbi Yosef, by Nathan Official, and the Sefer Nitzion Yashan, a guide for Jews disputing Christians, probably written in the early 14th century German lands, contained nearly identical answers to changes of Jewish ugliness and blackness. Answers to charges of Jewish ugliness and blackness. The heretics, i.e. Christians, ask and say, why are the majority of Gentiles, i.e. Christians, white and attractive, while the majority of Jews are black and ugly? Reply to them that it's comparable to fruit. When it begins to blossom, it is white. After it is finished, then it turns black, as with the sloes and plums. And every fruit that is red to begin with, when it is done, it is white, as with apples and pears or apricots. And this is the testimony for Israel, that they are pure of menstrual blood, and there is here, keep reading, gets better. Watch this. And there is here no blood at the start, but for the Gentiles who are not careful to avoid menstruation and have sex at the time when they are menstruating, there is red at the start. Therefore, the fruit that comes from this, the children are white. So this is a 13th, 14th century Jewish document saying that, hey, Jews were considered black, and here's the explanation. We're black like plums. These people are black. These people are white because of how they explained it was through menstrual sex. That's how they were explaining it. But the point is that they were physically and somatically seen as being black during this time. There's evidence of black Jews in medieval Europe. Let's keep going. In nearly identical manner, according to the 13th century Sefer Yosef HaMekaneh, because we Jews are from a clean and white seed, therefore our faces are black. But you from the seed of menstruation, therefore your visages are pale and reddened. It may well be that this charge that Christians saw Jews as black and ugly was invented, and that it reveals more about Jewish self-image than about how Christians actually saw them. Yet similar reactions to the foreigners and darkness of Muslims can be found from more or less the same period in Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parsifal, where it was stated that a child born of a Christian Muslim couple came out modeled white and black. One Christian writer depicted the much reviled Jewish Pope Anacletus II, elected in 1130, as specifically deformed, stinking with the Jewish odor, and dark and pale, more like a Jew or an Arab than a Christian. Let's keep reading. Early modern non-Jews in Western Europe also appeared to be confused or ambivalent about the color status of Jews. The English Sir William Brereton visited one of the Sephardic synagogues in Amsterdam in 1635 and wrote that the Jewish men were most black and insatiably giving unto women. In 1643, Isaac de la Pereire contended that once the Jew converts to Christianity, they will no longer have this dark complexion. They will change faces, and the whiteness of their complexion will have the same brightness as. And an Englishman, John Greenhall, visited the Jews' synagogue in London and wrote a friend about it in 1662. According to the chief ruler, probably the president of the Parnassium, as a very rich merchant, a big, black, fierce, and stern man. At the letter's end, Greenhall reiterated with ethnographic precision that the 100 or so Jews he saw at the synagogue are all generally black, so as they may be distinguished from Spaniards or native Greeks. For the Jews' hair have a deeper tincture or more perfect raven black. In 1690, Reverend Robert Kirk of Aberfoyle visited the same Church Alley synagogue, ending his depiction of the tire worship excuse me, of the worship with almost identical ethnographic punctuation. They were all very black men and indistinct in their reasoning as gypsies. Similar portrayals continued in the 18th century and later. William Black, Secretary of the Commissioners appointed by Governor William Gooch of Virginia to deal with the Indians, described Hester Levy, a daughter of the wealthiest and best known New York Jew, Moses Levy, whom he met in June 1744, as very well made, her complexion black, but very calmly. So she was black. She was a daughter of a very wealthy Jew, Moses Levy, in New York. This is in the book. This is in Johnathan Schorsch's book. This is why when you go to the Sephardic Atlantic and you read this, early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. This is why the book says that, because of these quotations that were written over time in history, recording what color were these Jews. Now, does it mean every Jew is black? No, that means there were black Jews existed. Black and white Jews existed throughout time. But what we're not going to do is ignore the black ones. Let's keep reading. As late, let me read this. It's a very well made, her complexion black, but very calmly. She had two charming eyes and well turned with a beautiful head of hair, coal black. As late as 1753, during the debate in England over the year's Jewish Naturalization Act, one polemicist suggested that anyone who wanted to look Jewish should rub herself with walnut husk to fix such an indelible hue and make you complete olive beauties with a lively complexion like that of a new Negro from the coast of Guinea. So if you want to look like a Jew, you have to make your hue become like a new Negro from the coast of Guinea. These are quotations that he's quoting. And again, this is why the Sephardic Atlantic says, as Johnathan Schorsch has convincingly argued, early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. This is why it says that. Let's keep reading. Lady Maria Nugent, visiting an 1803 theater performance in Jamaica's Spanish town, explicitly separated Jews and whites in her depiction of the audience members, who were all colors and descriptions: blacks, browns, Jews, and whites. Already in 1691, Francois Maximilian Mission, one of the influences of Buffon's Natural History, wrote against such views of the Jewish blackness, while bolstering in the process the impression that the idea was not uncommon. 'Tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black. The Jews are all black. For this is only true of the Portuguese, who, marrying always among one another, beget children like themselves. and consequently, the swarthiness of their complexion is entailed upon their whole race, even in the northern regions. But the Jews who are originally of Germany, those, for example, I have seen in Prague, are not blacker than the rest of their countrymen. So again, Francois Maximilian is saying that the Portuguese Jews were black and they begot children that were black. Simple. This is why the Sephardic Atlantic says, but they were easily counted among black people. Let's keep it going. It says, toward the latter end of the 18th century, one finds this same changeability of the Jews who expressed and update nuances in geographic context. The Reverend Samuel Stanhope Smith wrote that the Jews are fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France and in Turkey, swarthy in Portugal and Spain, olive in Syria and Chaldea, tawny or copper-colored in Arabia and Egypt. Perhaps the best indication that the valences involved in such distinctions also conveyed metaphysical import is the title of the mid-17th century English translation of a conversionary tract aimed at Jews by the formerly Jewish Samuel of Morocco, the blessed Jew of Morocco, or a blackamoor made white being a demonstration of the true messiahs out of the law and prophets by Rabbi Samuel. York Thomas Broad, 1649. Christians thought, especially among Iberian, often equated Jews and blacks in a moral manner. The 15th century Portuguese poet Alvaro de Brito Pestaña explicated the term Marrano in the following lines, pugning on the general negative meaning of Negro. It says, San Marranos, let me read it in English. Those who fake our faith are the Marranos, very faithless, baptized, who to the old law are bound by the black Abravanels, indoctrinated. And we know the Abravanels is a Sephardic Jewish family, and they call them black. Again, recapitulating, this is why the Sephardic Atlantic says they could be counted amongst black people. Jews and blackness or blacks became linked in the Iberian discourse for their supposedly heritable and indelible characteristics. Padre Mestre Gaspar dos Reis, designated by the Portuguese Inquisition in the 1640s to engage the accused Judaizer Isaac de Castro in the theological debate and convince him to renounce Judaism, got nowhere with the youth, as was true of all others appointed for the same end. With frustration, the priest concluded, citing Jeremiah 13:23, that it seemed to him that it's impossible for the Jews to repent of their errors, as it's impossible for a black to change his skin or the leopard to change his spots. And thus he judged the youth, Isaac de Castro, obstinate and pernicious. At times, these metaphysical linkages could be especially genetic. In the Merchant of Venice, Act 3, Scene 2, first printed in 1600, Shakespeare had Shylock swear to Tubal and to Cush, his countrymen, that he would rather have Antonio's flesh than 20 times the value of the sum that he did owe him. Cush, that is, Cush, the progenitor of black Africans, here became the countryman of the Jew in primitive vengeful spite. And some parenthetical remarks in the prologue of the English translation of the Geographical History of Africa by Leo Africanus, John Pori wrote about the fountains of the Nile, some way there are the people called the Kafri or the Kafates, being as black as pitch and of mighty stature, and as some think descendant of Jews. And now they are idolaters and most deadly enemies to the Christians, for they make continual assaults upon the Abyssinians, despoiling them both of life and goods. But all the day they lie lurking in mountains, woods, and deep valleys. This confused report of the interreligious wars and power struggles of Ethiopia presented the unambiguous image of the Jew. The black Caffres descended from the Jews who were themselves black, or else the Caffres descent into idolatry and bestial living entailed a will, their turning black, either reading highly plausible. But the current outer hatred for those formerly Jewish blacks for Christianity and civilized society reflected in this view only a logical development of now repressed inner hatred Jews bore towards Christendom. The male Jews' ancestral and spiritual allegiance was usually painted in dark and threatening tones, as in Ludovicio's Ariosto's comedy 2, Negromanti, the Necromancer, first presented in 1529 in Ferrara. The title character is conniving fraud, jack of all unrespectable trades. His servant Nibio describes him to the audience as follows: like gypsies, we go from place to place, and whenever he passes, he leaves his imprint like a snail, or for a more fitting comparison, like fire or lightning. And in each place, in order to disguise himself, he changes his name and says he's from another country. The first version of the play, his dress in his country. Now he calls himself Peter. Now John. Now he pretends to come from Greece. Now from Egypt. Now from some other country, Africa. In reality, he is a Jew, and he was among those who were expelled from Castile. It would be a long story if I were to tell you how many men he has cheated and robbed, how many poor homes he has broken up, how many he tainted with adultery by pretending that he would make barren wives pregnant, or by pretending to remove suspicion and discord that arise between husband and wives. That Ariosto presented the play in Ferrara, where a large community of ex-conversos resided, can be no coincidence. His harping on the Jews' assembling of national origins also reflected common conceptions, as did the choices of countries under Ottoman or Islamic rule, allying the Jew with the enemy of Christendom. Indeed, the Jew could seem either European or non-European at will, and his swarthiness played no small role in this, perhaps leading Ariosto to change the more specific Egypt of the play's first version to the more generic Africa of the final draft. So you can see right here, the person that made this play was playing on the fact that the Jews were seen as being swarthy or being black, and changed the point of origin of the character to Africa based upon that. Let's keep going. So while such views may be passed off as mere descriptive statements about the darkness of Sephardic Jews, they soon connected intimately with prescriptive notions based on the significance of physiological or racial characteristics. Thus, in 1750's position from Kingston, Jamaica, Christians objecting to a recent attempt by a Jewish landowner to vote presented the following argument. Though a mulatto of the fourth descent may vote at elections, yet the Jews, many of whom are mulattoes of that degree, are by our wise legislature absolutely excluded from that privilege. It is being expressly enacted that they, that said mulattoes, shall enjoy all the privileges and the immunities of His Majesty's white subjects of this island, provided that they are brought up in Christian religion, it being also unlawful to employ any Jew in any of the offices of record. They being put in that regard on the foot of mulattoes and Negroes by an act of the governor, council, and assembly of this island. So this source is telling you that these Jews were considered to be mulattoes and being put in the same regard as mulattoes and Negroes in Jamaica. This is in Kingston, Jamaica, 1750. Again, exemplifying why it says, but they were easily counted among black people. Who are they? The Jews, the early modern Jews. Let's keep reading. And it says, note that the lack of stability in the Jews' color and the overlap of culture and physiological otherness. Many of the Jews were mulattoes of the fourth degree, that is, very light-skinned blacks. Let me read that again. Many of the Jews were mulattoes of the fourth degree, that is, very light-skinned blacks, and hence should have been permitted to vote. But Jews were not Christians. Unlike mulattoes, the religious exclusion of Jews put them on the level of mulattoes and blacks. Jews both were and were not blacks, were and were not whites. These various views of Jews branded them in David Roediger's terminology as not yet white. And this goes back to what I've been saying, like haven't been just one color, one set of phenotypes. This has pretty much been the history of Jews for years. You have black ones, you have white ones, and that's pretty much indicative of any so-called lineage or what we call race. And when I use the word race, I'm using the original term lineage. You can have black, white, you can have different phenotypes within that lineage. Let's keep reading. The Jewish gaze outward ramified significantly on the internal perception as well. The effort to clarify the blackness of Jews helped shape some seminal moments in the development of Jewish autoethnography. Medieval Jewish, let's keep going. Medieval Jewish response to observed differences in skin color took on an apologetic tone, as seen from these sources linking inner purity, beauty, and goodness with outer darkness, lowliness, and oppression. Judas Rosenthal cited a medieval manuscript of polemics advising Jews accused of being uglier than Christians to retort that before our temple was destroyed, we were more attractive. On the basis of Isaiah 52, 14 and 15, medieval Jewish exegetes agreed with their Christian and Muslim compatriots that Jews were darker than their neighbors. Let me read that again, because maybe y'all didn't get that. You know what I'm saying? When y'all hear Jew and black together, Jews dark, y'all close your mind down. Y'all shut down and go into a sunken place. That's what you guys do. So let me read that again. Let me read that one more time. Medieval Jewish exegetes agreed with their Christian and Muslim compatriots that Jews were darker than their neighbors, arguing that this difference resulted from the melancholia of the Jews. Many Jewish writers concerned with the lost 10 tribes used color as one indicator of their panoply, the panoply of measures of the authenticity, and status of exotic Jews. The Italian Rabbi Ovadia de Bertinoro wrote circa 1487 that he himself saw 2 Jews from Ethiopia who had been brought as slaves by Jews in Cairo and redeemed, and they were a little black, only not so black as the Cushites. Describing in a letter of 1488 in the land of Aden, Ovadia said that its inhabitants are somewhat black. It is unclear if this included the Jews residing there or not. A mid-16th century letter of Rabbi Yisrael of Jerusalem to Rabbi Avraham of Perugia, Italy, similarly described a prisoner ransomed by the Alexandrian Jewish community who related signs and wonders regarding the kingdom of the Jewish tribes. This prisoner may very well have been David ha-Rovini, the so-called messianic pretender. At first, the prisoner was said to be almost like a Cushite. Remember, this is a Jew that they're redeeming, and they're doing a law of redemption here. Yet it is very unclear from the text just who was a Cushite and who was not. The prisoner was described as a Cushite, yet the not quite Cushite prisoners seem to have been the Cushite with whom some well-to-do Ethiopian Jews left on their mission. While the efforts to fix the status of these various exotic Jews in Jewish communities come across as relatively neutral ethnographic observations, others possess more ethnocentric overtones. Harold Brackman cited the fascinating and revealing imitations made to the color scheme of Noah's 3 sons that appeared in the first printed edition of the early medieval text Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Shem, originally black and pleasing. Let me read that again. Shem, originally black and pleasing, in earlier manuscripts was Europeanized to become white and pleasing. But the original manuscript of Pirkei Eliezer says Shem was black and pleasing. Black and pleasing. Again, this is why this book, Sephardic Atlantic, says, as Johnathan Schorsch has convincingly argued, early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. It is literal. Let's keep going. It says Shem, originally black and pleasing in earlier manuscripts, was Europeanized, becoming white and pleasing. Ham's description, black as a crow, was evidently deemed too ambiguous and was changed to black and ugly. Yafet, whose whiteness originally signified a lack, now had his whiteness transformed to correspond with the new ideals of European beauty. He became entirely white and beautiful. Brackman, unclear on when these changes were made, wrote that these editorial revisions were in place by the 16th century from a thorough review of many manuscripts and early printed editions. I suspect that these changes derived from the 16th century itself. The second edition table of contents differed from the passages within. The one containing the color changes, the other not. The discrepancy evinces a responsible editorial hand contemporary with the printing. The first three editions date from 1514. Constantinople, 1544, Venice in 1567, and Sabioneta. This desire of some Jews to clarify their own color had everything to do with their white cultural surroundings. Indeed, that the medieval author of Nishon and Yashun had provided a second retort to the changes of their Jewish ugliness and blackness, which hinted at the increasing admiration, however begrudging, of European aesthetic norms and values. And one should also answer that the Gentiles are fornicators and have sex during the day and see the faces of beautiful paintings and give birth in their image, as it is written, and the sheep conceived when they came to drink before the rods. Genesis 30, 38, 39. Despite external resistance, early modern Sephardim of the upper classes hewed away the previously emphasized medieval differences between Jews and Christians. As has been often noted, much of the Sephardic self-image was constructed with the same tools and materials as the Christian Iberians. Scholars had long touted the extraordinary degree of Sephardic assimilation into the fluency and general Iberian cultures from high to low. Already, the generations before the expulsions had thoroughly integrated secular and Jewish theological and philosophical speculation. The Messianism of Shlomo Moko and other crypto-Jews and former conversos showed immense overlaps with the Spanish and Portuguese Christian millenarianism. Yosef Yerushalmi, and others have demonstrated the degree to which Sephardic secular literatures after the expulsion reflected contemporary European and especially Iberian literary and aesthetic standards. Calderon, Gongora, Quevedo, listed by Bodian as recurrent citations. Some elite Iberian Jews and conversos aspired to claim noble lineages. They insisted on their own purity of blood. Bowden wrote to the impulse to continue Iberian social intellectual patterns among the Amsterdam Sephardim. Portuguese remained the predominant language among Amsterdam Sephardim until the late 18th century, among the Curaçoan Jews until the mid-19th century. In the era of the formation and solidification of Europeans' national identities, the color, ethnicity, and social status of Jews caused no small amount of anxiety among Jews. In these centuries, chronicler Elihu Kapsali told readers people who had never seen a Jew imagined that he lacked the form of a man. Shlomo Ibn Verga assumed that the Christian images that the Jew is but a human-shaped animal. As David S. Katz phrased it regarding England, the Jews were strangers in religion and language, in appearance and in habits. In Northern Europe and its colonial territories, where many of the Sephardim fled, the issues of complexion must have contributed, especially among the elite, to the clarity of cultural differences setting off the Portuguese from their surroundings. In Bowden's fallacious phrasing, remember the Francois Maximilian Mission had in the 1690s rebuked the error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese, emphasis added. Portuguese Jews were black. Then, according to even Mission, perhaps then more lies under the surface than the usual formation of conversal Isaac Cardoso's resorting to the proverbial line from the Song of Songs 1:6 in the dedication of his famous work of the apologetics La Excelencias de los Hebreos. Negro yo y hermosa, no me mires porque yo denegrira que me ennegreció el sol. I am black but beautiful. Do not look at me because I am blackened, degraded because the sun blackened me. Was it such equation of Jews and blackness that inspired some Jews to argue their own whiteness? It is probable that such usages were not merely metaphorical in the general moral sense. These discourses, Jewish and non-Jewish, continue to link outer appearance with inner character. If the Spanish were the best of all physical types stated by Frederick P. Bowser, then the African was near proximo as a royal decree phrased it. John Francis Gemelli Carre, a lawyer who left Naples in 1683 to travel around the world, described at one point toward the end of his 600-page account of the journey the village of San Lorenzo de los Negros in New Spain. This place being all inhabited by blacks look like some part of Guinea, but they are handsome and aptly themselves to husbandry. They are descended from some runaway slaves, and they are afterwards permitted to remain free, upon condition they should not entertain any fugitive blacks, but restore them to their owners, which they religiously observe. These blacks whose civility was proved by their adhering to social contract to cease aiding and abetting resistance to the slave economy possessed a more pleasing appearance than their uncivilized cousins in Africa. John Gemelli Carte's text thematized this link, but they are handsome and apply themselves to husbandry. Their attractiveness went along with their productivity, indeed existed because of it. Conversely, English traveler to the East Henry Blunt noted that the distinctive Jewish appearance derived from wallowing in the dirt and the sun makes them more swarthy than others. So they're trying to explain that the reason why these people are black is because they're dirty and they've been in the sun. Let's keep reading. It says, race, as their usage testified, was also portmanteau term. Lancelot Addison made distinctions between some of the components of race in his famous 1675 book link description of the Jews of Maghreb. The Jews in this continent much resemble the Spaniard and Portuguese in their stature and complexion, but are much different in their nature and disposition as being more flexible, sequacious, especially in things whereby they may reap advantage. Sephardi apologists sometimes produce a similarly racial discourse of superiority. Manasseh ben Israel resorted to the same rhetorical strategy in a oft-quoted dislocation of the Jews and Native Americans. The latter could not descend from the former, since the Jews were the best disposed people of the most handsome looks and most beautiful understanding in the world. How then could these be the Indians, who lack all of this, being ugly in body and with rude understanding? Manasseh's dissociation of Jews and Indians aimed directly at the more widely held opinion that Indians descended from Jews, since the Indians are fearful, ungrateful, weak, superstitious, shrewd, and lying, all properties of Jews. Isaac Cordesso cited Manasseh ben Israel declared in a good classical fashion the beloved and perfect characteristics of the Jews to be beauty, strength, honor, science, wisdom, children, and wealth, and which are enclosed all the things that make a person happy as regarding a beautiful body, and strength as regarding the external goods, honor, and wealth as regarding the goods of the soul, science, and wisdom. Daniel Levi Miguel de Barrios' history of the Amsterdam Sephardic community comprises an amazing hodgepodge of genealogical and other efforts to glorify the Jewish descendants of Shem. Noah claimed God the Creator, who was not the God of Lampheth, Japhet, nor of Ham, but rather Sem, because Sem conveyed his true knowledge to the Hebrew. The Jews elsewhere in the barrios exerted himself in refuting genealogical linkage between the Jews and the Indians or Ethiopians. Barrios was writing against the authors of Montuan, Jesuit Antonio Posaveno, circa 1533 and 1611, who have cited Prester John as an authority for the fact that the Abyssinians in general originated from Solomon in their aristocracy from Abraham. Bernardo Jose Aldrete, 1565 to 1645, canon of the church at Cordoba, had argued that ancient Hebrew had devolved into Ethiopian after the exile of Jews to that locale. Ancient writers, including Sulpicius Severus, circa 360 to 425, argued that the barbarian nations such as the Parthians, Medes, Indians, and Ethiopians descended from the Jews. But the early modern writers, including Barrios, probably were influenced by the appearance of the first Spanish translation of the Ethiopian royal chronicles, the Kebra Nagast, which detailed the Solomonic ancestry of the Christian kings of Ethiopia. De Barrios' distancing of Jews from Ethiopians was no mere genealogical exercise, but part of vividly living Iberian polemics about the cultural status of Jews, as is evident from its odd appearance in the history of the Sephardim of Amsterdam. Both the Jewish and general discourse in which Sephardic Jews participated glorified whiteness and denigrated blackness. The constellation of signification surrounding whiteness linked it to a noble status, purity, and good looks. Wielding ancient literary conventions, several 16th and 17th century authors asserted that Adam and Noah, and presumably their wives, from whom sprang all humanity, had possessed white skin. In one poem, from whom sprang all humanity had, in one poem, the 17th century converso poet Antonio Enriquez Gomez had the first man, Adam, describe Eve with many of the total whiteness known to the rhetorical purse. Beautiful mistress of mine, on whose snowy whiteness the dawn moves, lily pristine, white and fair, who amid coral keeps her store of pure crystal waters. The golden tresses of your hair appear as a flock of goats, and the whiteness of aurora and your handsome tower-like neck, and the 10 lilies are composed your beautiful hands of white. Although Eve's response to Adam played with the songs 5 and 11, his hair curled and black as a raven, Enriquez omits the vulgar reference that the raven portrays the lover as fair-headed. Idolized white skin face both physical and metaphysical threats. Madrid-born ex-converso Abraham Pereira included among the corporal ravages of the old age the fact that the white hands are turned the color of ash. Pure hands, as aphoristic logic had it, were white, contaminated with sin, they blacken. No matter how white your hands are, if you handle carbon, they have to get sooty. The plethora of Ladino, Judeo-Spanish songs include not a few in which the heroes and heroines constantly drew white characterization and the villains' lowly black attributes. One lyric, Tarquino y Lucrecia, featured a cuckolded husband threatening to avenge the affair of his wife by killing her in the bed alongside one of the black slaves, thus destroying her reputation. Consider also the old and widespread song adopted by the Sephardic Jews. Morena me llaman. Morena me llaman. Let me just read it in English. They call me dark, but I was born white. For walking as a virgin in the sun, I lost my color. Dark's the king's sons call me. If he calls me so another time, I will go off with him. So this is what these, real quick commentary on this, these Sephardim were singing this song. They call me dark. They call me dark. They call me dark. Okay, reading. This lyric was known on the Iberian Peninsula from the early songbooks and partakes of the genre of lyrics defending dark-haired and dark-skinned women. The great Spanish playwright Lope de Vega served a Señor Discretos recorded a 17th century form. The Sephardic song's initial couplet attested in various and early cancioneros connected the problematic exterior hue to an internal moral tarnish. Here's another song. Though I'm dark, I was born white. Watching cattle, I lost my color. So the Sephardim was singing these songs reflecting what? That some of these people were dark-skinned. And again, this is why the Sephardic Atlantic says, as Johnathan Schorsch has convincingly argued, early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. And when you go to the reference, it tells you to read this, and this is why. The couplet's darkling is meant to play punily with the different meaning of the cognate terms ganado, cattle, ganar, to earn, to profit, etc. My reading finds corroboration in a statement made by scholars treating a crypto-Jewish novel of 16th century Portugal, in which the hero says that he went to. Oh, crap! I didn't mean to go that far up. That he went to the fields of the Tejo, i.e., Lisbon, to rescue his cattle, which in the pastoral code means that he went to improve his worldly situation. In the Ladino ballad, then the Jewish visage is darkened by the maternal material desires. Whiteness took an additional significance with the increased Iberian conflict with Muslims and then increased conflict with other non-European peoples. It is acquired from the importance of the colonial territories where such conflicts took on a demographic and not merely a conceptual character, one that remained persistent and required stark segregation of sides. Rebellious millenarian slaves in the 1580s, Brazil, both Amerindians and blacks were already employing this vocabulary. They believed and certainly hoped that God was coming now to free them from their captivity and to make them lords of the white people. As one informant to the Lisbon and Inquisition puts it, by the 16th and certainly the 17th century, whiteness carried quite real social effects in the colonies of European power and in the metropoles of an increasing number of European colonial powers. It might well determine what professions you could practice, what organization you could join, and whom you could marry. Mim de Sá died 1572. Governor of Brazil included in his will a provision allowing a share in his inheritance only to descendants who married a white old Christian. A few direct summoning by Jews of whiteness surfaced in the 17th century. These point to an abstract but operative concept among the Jews of whiteness as an indicator of status, respectfully attainment, for a reason left unclear by documentation. Manuel Nunes, a Portuguese merchant of Amsterdam, required in 1610 corroboration of his social stature. Perhaps some question about his genealogy threatened his status and entry into the Portuguese nation in Amsterdam. Financial difficulties may have stood behind his need, as on 19th of May of that year, another merchant, Hendrik Broen, later a director of West India Company, had notarized a registration of protest of non-payment of Nunes for a bill of exchange. So on 15 September, no fewer than 6 days, 6 other Sephardim friends or associates acting on Nunes' initiative appeared before a notary public. They declared that Manuel Nunes is the son of Fernando Rodriguez and Leonor Nunes in Lisbon, that he is the son of a white father and a mother, that neither of them have any part Morisco blood nor blood of blacks. In order to assuage his debtors and doubters, Nunes had some associates record an official statement of his quality, which not coincidentally emphasizes social and inherited purity. One wonders about the exact formulation. The general source of the terminology existed in the standard contemporary Portuguese discourse about purity of blood. Perhaps the intended audience of this declaration resided in Iberian Catholic territories, and it is they who have worried about Nunes' bloodlines. Yet the terminological evocation of Nunes' friends neglected, obviously, his Jewish blood. In other words, it specified just which elements of the blood period discourse these Sephardim found useful in the Amsterdam outposts of the Iberian commercial empire. Another summoning of Jewish whiteness, no less significant despite its coming from a non-Jewish source, emerges from a license to practice medicine awarded in 1684 by the University of Padua to Yaakov ben Shemuel Levi. This doctor's certificate presents a despatch whose borders are thick with a colorful riot of ornately drawn plants, insects, and peacocks. In the center of the right panel stands the Latin text declaring the recipient's approval by the University Senate. In the center of the left panel, the portrait, what assumes must be a young Jewish graduate, pale and clothed in modest somber garb of a physician has been painted into a laurel red, which in turn is held aloft by black servants dressed in colorful exotic outfit. The symbolism speaks clearly. The white physician rides on the support of the black servant in medicinal plants, both products extracted from exotic locales. This certificate presumably represents a standard template into which each graduate portrait was then painted. The stylistic differences cannot be missed. Jews who increasingly were allowed to study medicine at a European university in the 17th century could take advantage of an educational and economic system built on the backs of excluded non-whites could construct their own status as whites. Finally, Rabbi Saul Levi Mortera's description of the basic social status of the soldiers fighting with the Portuguese against the Dutch and Jews in Brazil, quoted in chapter 5, comprises an implicit arrangement of Jews as whites. He deemed the inclusion of these enemies' lowly status, beginning with blacks, mulattoes, as critical to his argument, positing that Jews as especially favored by God as noble, pure, and effectively unlike their base Brazilian enemy minions as white. I am not trying to link many citations included here into a linear development of Jewish whiteness. Rather, statements about Jewish whiteness emerged when there were specific forces made them useful, important. Such was the case everywhere. For instance, Rabbi Beria Baruch B. Isaac Shapira died 1664 in Constantinople, cited in a sermon that previously discussed the passage from Pirkei de Eleazar, leaving intact the original scheme for the three sons of Noah. Shem equal black and pleasing. Ham equal black as raven, Yvette entirely white, which evidently posed no problem for him. In the 17th century Sephardic Amsterdam, however, the intellectual, emotional, and theological prioritization of whiteness, worries about the perceived Jewish blackness, increasing colonial opportunities and mindsets, and the anxiety of some congregants over the visibility of black and mulatto slaves within their own community led to an increased application of black-white discourse. The efforts of former conversos writers to assert the whiteness of Sephardic Jews and those of the barrios to distinct Jews from Indians and Ethiopians in its history of the Amsterdam Sephardic community reflect this context of seeing Jews, Ethiopians, American Indians as distant relatives, linked often because of their presumed inferiority and superstitions primitively. Efforts to establish social and administrative distance between whites and blacks within the Jewish community arose in the 17th century, Amsterdam and Cochin, India. Themes to be picked up in the next chapter. It was evidently worrisome themes, I argue, that helped discourage the absorption of non-white slaves in Judaism in the Jewish community. And that's the chapter. All right? What's going on, man? What's going on? Yeah, right. The Pirkei de Eleazar, India Negro Datar says, the Pirkei de Eleazar says Shem is the blacks. You're right. And he ended the chapter with that again. And Jews had no problem with, a particular Jew didn't have a problem with Shem, with it saying that Shem equals black and pleasing. Yeah, they did do that. He admitted that was being changed during the 16th century. They changed the original text that did say black and pleasing. They changed it to white and pleasing because during this time, this is when all of the racial concepts started to hit the scene. The concept of whites being superior, blacks being inferior, blacks being slaves, and typecasted as slaves came during this time. So it became conducive to try to identify as white as versus black. Well, as we did, he brought many sources pointing out that you had black Jews. You had black Jews in Amsterdam. You saw the black Jew in New York and his daughter being described as dark and comely. And if you wanted to look like a Jew, you would have to rub walnut husk on your skin until you gain the indelible hue to look like a new Negro on the coast of Guinea. So again, this is why we read in the Sephardic Atlantic One more time. Early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. That's why. We read about the light skin that the Jews of Jamaica were considered to be light skinned blacks. We read about the chief ruler of the synagogue in England being called the big. He was big and black. There's no way around it. These Jews were counted among the black people. So anybody saying there's no such thing as black Jews is a farce. That's just false. They're not studied. They're not educated in the area, and they shouldn't be speaking on it. You know what I mean? At least study. All right, let me check some of these comments out. Right. It did say that the bottom of page 184 says Shem was originally black until the Europeans whitewashed the text. Yes. And they even discuss how they know that that's the case. They can see that it did not fit. Yeah, man. Hey, shalom to everybody. Hit that like button, man. Hit that like button. Source Gang, 7 Gang over everything. You know how we rocking, man. He said, my scholarship is needed on Burying TV. I will gladly do a PowerPoint presentation on Burying TV. Just, send a shout out for me. Yeah, there are black Jews and black Arabs. Like I have a book right here. Maybe I should scan this one in next. Russia and the Blacks, Blacks in Russia, I think it's called, and it quotes Golden D. Hunger, which is a Negro Russian, and she went through the records of the Russian Tsars, and they listed Negroes as Jews and Arabs. Ramal Yahoo said there's too many documents about Portuguese Jews being black with coarse hair, small chin, and etc. Yeah, man. There's a plethora of sources describing the Sephardic Jew, Portuguese Jews as being somatically black. There's no way around it. These people are physically black. He said, I told Barry and holler at y'all, but he probably scared. I don't know why. I mean, anybody's welcome to come on our channel. I don't know how he'd be scared. I don't even know what does Barry and TV teach. Okay, Low Avenues, what is your Y DNA, man? Low Avenue said he got his DNA results back, y'all. So I'm anxious to hear what the brother's DNA came back as. But yeah, man, anybody saying that we're no black Jews or they were all converts, this chapter deals with all of that. First of all, conversion was a rare. Oh, this brother's EP52. Let's plug you in the phylogeny. Let's see your phylogeny, phylogenetic tree. So you said you're EP252. EP252. All right. I'm going to put it on the screen. Let's look at it together. I think Ngozi said he EP252. I may be mistaken. But we love dealing with DNA here. All right. Let me pull up the genetic tree. Let me pull this. I got so many damn tabs open. DNA ancestral marker. What is it? Yeah, DNA ancestral marker. Genetic homeland. Yeah, here it is right here. All right, so let's look at your tree real quick. Of course, you went from E1B1A. So you're under EU174. That's your clade. EU174. See, you see it right there? EU174 P252. Found in haplogroup E1b. So if you go up here, U174, you descend from EM2 and EB38. E1B1A. So you were stressing for no reason, man. I told you, like, if you're African American male, most likely you're going to be E1B1A. Of course, yeah, 81.6% West African. All right, so Ramal Yahoo said he has dialogues about Israelites, DNA and stuff. Faithful to God be on there teaching that blacks can't be Jews unless they are converts. Yeah, that's racism. Anybody saying, "Oh, well, blacks can't be Jews because they black," that's if you base it off skin color, that's modern racism. Because just because someone's black does not eliminate them from a pedigree or a lineage. It doesn't work that way. It has nothing to do with skin color. It has everything to do with a lineal descent. School of Skill says, in my opinion, stay away from burying TV, a bunch of name calling, slandering, and lying on Hebrew. Yeah, that's all these channels, man. Tell me something I didn't know. That's all these channels, bro. Like a lot of these channels, man, they don't have no scholarship, so they gotta lean on what you call it. They gotta lean on and depend on ad hominem attacks and logical fallacies. They don't have anything else in the chamber. They ain't got no bullets. You know, dealing with us, you're gonna have to come with it. We don't play over here. You're gonna have to come with knowledge. You're gonna have to come with sources, citations, articles. We want to know where you're getting this stuff from. Or are you just freestyling off the dome and making up stuff as you go with ad hoc and post hoc arguments? So yeah, man, welcome. Hey, tell them to come over here. I have a discourse and a dialogue with them over here. We can talk about this. You guys allergic to Jews being black? Jews is allergic to Jews being black. Ain't that something? Let me see if I can find that reference in the book Hybrid Hate about the Jews being semantically black. Yeah, here we go. Where is it at? Yeah, this is in a book, Hybrid Hate. Let me pull this up, give y'all a little something extra. Yeah, man, facts. Love yourself. Yes, I do consider E1B1B as Israelites as well. I love being a Hebrew and I love being an Israelite. Israelim. Ramal Yahoo, Yashub, email Barian at BarianTeacher@gmail. That channel definitely would drop their jaws with what you present. Barian is search for truth. He's searching for truth, honestly. I'm one of his biggest critics. Okay. Yeah, I just said that. Yeah, I consider clades of E1B1B to be Israelites. I consider E1B1B being Israelites. E3B. In my model, I have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob having EP2, and EP2 can make E1B1A or E1B1B. So the 12 tribes would eventually divulge into E1B1A and E1B1B from my perspective. So I consider those with E1B1B as Jews. All right. And my model's a little bit more complicated, so it's not cut and dry as some people try to make it. Let me share the stream so you guys can see what the source in Hybrid Hate by Tudor Parfit. If y'all haven't seen it, I did a whole series where I read Tudor Parfit's book about the African American and African Jews from the beginning, the forward, prologue, all the way to the end. All right. Let's start here, page 42. This is Hybrid Hate by Tudor Parfit, page number 42. It says, Sander Gilman, among others, has pointed to the Gentile perceptions that Jews were just as black as Negroes. According to Gilman, Jews were quite literally seen as black. Gilman 94. As Melamed following Gilman put it, there was a strong European tradition dating back to the Middle Ages, which maintained that Jews were black, or at least swarthy, and finds sharp expression in modern anti-Semitic literature. It's Melamed 2003. High Cohen in the revisionist article shows that some, but not all, of the evidence used to support the notion of a long continued tradition perceived Jewish blackness, in fact, does no such thing. But he also provides some new evidence of his own perception of Jewish blackness. High Cohen 2018. Much of the evidence produced by Gilman and Melamed stands, and a good deal more evidence is provided throughout this book. But such evidence should be understood in the context of overarching caveat that the general concept of Jewish color was chronically unstable. So what did he just say? Much of the evidence produced by Gilman and Melamed stands. What was the evidence were they bringing out? Gilman said the Jews were quite literally seen as black. You had this High Cohen fella trying to debunk that, but the evidence still stands. That's what Tudor Parfit is reiterating in his book. Nonetheless, there clearly was a long-standing discourse not only in religious and liturgical works, but also in early naturalist writing that constructed the color of Jews not simply as metaphorically black through their perceived relationship with, for instance, transgression, but also somatically black. Somatically means physically. These guys were physically black. As early as the 12th century, not only theology, but medicine and natural science conspired to treat the Jews, black or dark complexion, not only as an image of the soul, but also the empirical facts supported by scientific explanation. So these people were seen as being black. Get over it. There's a such thing as black Jews in history. Physically, not none of that metaphorical stuff you guys try to run to. All right, there's one more quote I want to get out of here. And we're going to look at some DNA. Let me open that back up for you. Oh, the Papian people have haplogroup D. That's what's up. Kayam, my email is HebrewJedi@gmail.com. You put it in the chat. HebrewJedi@gmail.com. There you go. What are you saying? Thanks. Nazarene says, thanks, Aki. What do we say of the blacks of Papua New Guinea? Are they E? And the brother responded said they're D. Yeah, so you can't go off skin colors. All black people are genetically not the same. My opinion on Tudor Parfit is like my opinion on a lot of authors. They're just giving a objective, for the most part, objective standpoint on it. So just like he put in his book, he's like, look, the evidence stands that these people saw and witnessed black Jews, and they were somatically black. So I like him because he's objective and he's honest about it. So I think he's a really good scholar. Let me share the screen again. We're going to read one more page from Tudor Parfit's Hybrid Hate. Again, if you haven't seen the video, I did a video covering 2 chapters in that book dealing with this topic. So right here says, one of the arguments deployed to explain the darkness or the blackness of the Jews was the food they ate. So this is the naturalistic people trying to figure out why these people are black, right? In 1599, Henry Boots died in 1632. One-time master of Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, produced an entertaining food guide called the Diet's Dry Dinner. He noted correctly that the Jews were great lovers of goose, which creature, according to him, filled the body with superfluous humors. This resulted in the Jews being passing melancholious, their color swart, black, and their disease very perilous. So he was saying, well, these people are black because they ate goose meat. Let me keep reading. If they had eaten hair instead, he opined, they might possibly have become paler and more beautiful. Indeed, the Italians, he observed, had a saying, which speaketh thus of a fair man, he have eaten a hair. So this is the type of stuff that they believed during this time, and it was trying to explain the phenomenon of these Jews being black. Oh, it's because they ate goose, and then if they would actually eat hair, they would become white. So again, this is more proof that these people saw these Sephardim as being black. All right. All right. We do real scholarship and research over here. You know how we rocking, man. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. All right. Should I even go into what should I go into? DNA? Let me open up my Google tab real quick before we close out. He said, bald head reason at its finest. Woo. Let's see. On that E3B thing, I do have something about the Cape Verdeans. And this is why I look at the Jews with E3B as being actual authentic Jews from my standpoint, right? So this is an article, Y Chromosomal Lineages in the Cabo Verde Islands, witnessing the diverse geographic origin of its first male settlers. You read the abstract, it says the Y chromosome haplogroup composition of the population of the Cabo Verde archipelago was profiled by using 32 single nucleotide polymorphisms or SNPs markers and compared with the potential source potential from Iberia, West Africa, and the Middle East. According to the traditional view, the major proportion of the founding populations of Cabo Verde was of West African ancestry, with the addition of a minor fraction of male colonizers from Europe. Unexpectedly, more than half of the paternal lineages, 53% of Cabo Verdeans, clustered in haplogroups I, J, K, and R1, which are characteristics of populations of Europe and the Middle East, while being absent in the probable West African source population of the Guinea-Bissau. Moreover, a high frequency of J lineage in Cabo Verdeans relate more closely to the population of the Middle East and probably provides its first genetic evidence of the legacy of Jews, because again, the J marker is considered a Jewish marker in secular fields. It says in addition, but here's the point I want to point out, right? In addition, the considerable proportion, 20.5% of E3B M81 lineages indicates a possible gene flow from the Middle East or Northeast Africa, which at least partly could be ascribed to the Sephardic Jews. So E3B being among the Sephardic Jews, that's why I do not discount them. Right? All right, so should I do one more? Before you let me reiterate about the E3A sample or E1B1A samples found amongst Jews as well before I close out. Because we try to do interdisciplinary studies here. We don't just go history or anthropology. We do anthropology, archaeology, genetics, and history all together. We do it all together. Interdisciplinary studies. So what I want to do is go back to family tree DNA, and we did this the other day as well. Let me get this genetic tree so I can show you the relationship at U1B1A on genetichomeland.com, which is a good tool for mapping and charting your phylogenetic tree. Let me go here and have it loaded up for you, so I don't have to keep opening and closing the share button. All right, check this out. This will be my last point, and I'm out. So if you go to Family Tree DNA and the Jewish E Project, we was talking about this yesterday. Of course, there's a bunch of E3B examples. Like you cannot exclude E3B from the Jewish experience. It's just impossible. Look, EM35, EV22, more EM35 samples. I think is the most popular. But if you scroll down, EM34, stroll down, these are all samples from modern Jews, right? You'll see EM2 here in a minute, right here. EM2, these are all Jewish people. There are 5 clades of EM2. One of them is of unknown origin. One of the E12s comes from Hungary and is actually Ashkenazi. It says it right there. I'll blow this up. Maybe you guys are not seeing it. There you go. Mandel, Ashkenazi, Hungary is the ancestor. And it's obviously E1B1A. EP177, I believe, is one mutation removed from EV38. And this one right here, Thomas Smith the second, born 1700 in Prince PW County. I actually looked this person up. He was a farmer. He's Jewish. He's a Jew. And he's ECTS 9954. And most likely he could have been a white European male. And that's why, again, you can't judge people based upon looks. You just can't do it. This is a sub-Saharan African DNA clade. So we're going to copy and we're going to put it in the genetic homeland of pedigree display. Good tool to, if you want to figure out what branch you're on. So search. And you're going to clearly see that this man's DNA that was found in Virginia. So anybody said there were no Jews, there were no Jews that we're connected to in America. That's false. 1700. This is when this man was born. He was born around 1700, and he is E1B1A. How do we know that? Look, M2. The 15th level of his phylogenetic tree is M2, which mutated from V38, and it kept mutating. U175 kept mutating all the way down here to CTS 9954. This man is E1B1A. Right? Thomas Smith II, born 1700, PW County, Virginia. And then you have James Lau, born 1858 and died 1900, United States, Native American, also EM2. So we have the genetic evidence. Also, as well, the cell tomes is like 80% Jew, 80% E1B1A, E3A, and in the 20th century, it's recorded that a lot of them were still relating that they were Jews. All right, so I'm gonna end there, and we pretty much we covered a lot of ground on this one. Jews can be counted among Black people according to Johnathan Schorsch's work and the various historical references that he brought forth. The fact that they said in order to be a Jew, you have to rub your skin with walnut husks until you gain the indelible hue of a new and gain the complexion of a new Negro of the coast of Guinea, the congregation of Black Jewish men in Amsterdam and in England, one of the rulers or the rabbis being described as big and black and fierce. What we read in Tudor Parfit's work about the Jews were somatically black. They were physically black, and you had the naturalists and these dietitians that were trying to figure out why they were black. Oh, well, maybe it's because they eat goose meat. That's why they're dark. But if they ate rabbit meat, they would become white. So these people are actually physically seen as black, counted among Black people. We read the book and the historical sources. With that, I say shalom. Let's get it. 7 gang, Source Gang over everything. Now we rocking, man. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Tune in tomorrow. Brandon Israel is going to be dropping some pertinent information on migration patterns and DNA. You don't want to miss it. Let's look up the video file. Let's play this. Let's end it with this.
Big business.
RSK, let it play, boy.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. I wake up and say me a prayer. Brush my teeth, babe, then I throw on some threads. Wash my face, grab a cup, pour me some yum. Put on my backpack, then I'm off to the bread. I eat these devils for breakfast, gotta be careful. Whole lot of blood being shed in the streets. World is so wicked, I weep for the living. I drop a free cheer for the dead. All my white friends in my pocket, or either they loading onto this black card that I swipe. Say every time that I drop it, the verses be hitting more harder than problems of life. Rich, I collected 2 pennies from every person that willingly gave me advice. Being afraid can't exist in my spirit. I'm fearing no man but the Father in Christ. I put in work with the brothers. We stood on them corners from 10 to like 9 the same night, teaching our people the gospel, equipped with a camera, some posters, some speakers, and mic. Every time that I see mama, she telling me, son, you gotta walk in the light. Christ, the bread of heaven, keep feeding my spirit, and I want a low, not a slide. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
When I tell you I'm an Israelite, tribe of Judah, don't you take it personal. Plead the blood on these demons, we purging them. Don't entertain Jezebels, we be curving them. Ayy, I got a ribbon, she virtuous. In person, this blue life ain't virtual. I can't forget when I heard the truth. I got cut with that word, it got surgical. Conviction can lead to repentance. I pray these verses encourage you. We repented, now we on the vertical. Judah rising, see Isaiah 32. Big business, nothing minuscule. I picked up that pen back in middle school. Guard your light and take heed who you listen to. Watch your mouth and your ears and your vision too. Hashatan and Shalkani won't finish you. In Mortal Kombat, this war is not physical. Gird your loins up and follow the general. Messiah is coming, that's scriptural. You gotta starve your flesh. The real war ain't even started yet. This look like a setup for a second exodus. I'm trying to be where the water at. Let's get it.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
Seven candlesticks up, and ain't a debate, it's a stick up. Gang.